Thanks for watching 5-Minute Bible Studies. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Gospel according to Mark. What makes it different? What makes it unique from the other three Gospels? Well, if you listened to our episode or watched our episode on Matthew's account, you'll see that he wrote to the Jewish audience. Now, Mark has a completely different approach than Matthew, and even still than Luke or John. Mark wrote to a very specific audience as well. We need to understand exactly who he wrote to in order to properly understand why he wrote the things that he wrote, what his perspective and what his purpose in writing is. When we think of the man Mark himself, he's found 8 times in the New Testament text. Sometimes he's called John Mark, which John is his Jewish name and Mark is his Roman name. And that's kind of a head scratcher because the Jews rarely took on their Roman name or went by their Roman name. But Mark does most often go by his Roman name. And so he had certainly a different connection to the Romans, although being born a Jew, than the other Jews had. And that's something significant when we're considering the gospel that he wrote. One thing also, as we read through his gospel account, is we see that Mark takes the time to translate Aramaic words like Boanerges, meaning sons of thunder, or Talitha Cumi, meaning little girl, arise, or Ephphatha, meaning be opened. Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus. Abba means father, or Golgotha, which means place of the skull. These are things that if he wrote to the Jewish audience, he would never even dream about stopping and translating these Aramaic words, because these are all very simple Aramaic words that all of the Jews knew and understood. That wasn't a problem. And so it is very clear here from the onset that Mark had no intention to write to the Jewish audience. Okay, that was left to Matthew. Mark has a totally different reader in mind. We need to find out who that is. Another thing of interest that is unique to Mark's account is his use of Latin words. And, this is very fascinating in that at the time, the Greek language was the most valuable language on the earth. And although Mark wrote his gospel account primarily in Greek, he does stop and use Latin words from time to time. Now, this separates us certainly from the Jewish reader, but it also separates us from the Greek reader as well, because Latin here in its evolution, where is that coming from? It's coming from Rome. It's coming from the Romans. And so we can piece a few things together here and come to understand that he probably didn't have in mind the Jewish reader or the Greek reader. He uses his Roman name, Mark. He uses Latin words that were unique to the Romans. All of this seems to point to the idea that Mark was writing specifically his gospel narrative to the Romans. Now, I want us to look here also at something that is unique about Mark's account. He likes to use the word immediately. Now, there's something about Roman culture that is somewhat similar to American culture as well. We like things summarized. We like things not so drawn out, but we like things just point by point and quick transitions. Let's get from point A to point B as quickly as we can. We see that in Mark's account as well. One of his favorite words is the word immediately. He uses it 36 times in his 16-chapter book. And he uses it as a transitional word. He makes his point, he gives a narrative, and then he uses that word immediately, and then goes right on to his next point, the next narrative of Jesus Christ, making his book very quick to move through, very quick to read, and certainly it is the shortest gospel account that we have recorded in the Scriptures. And it's probably the most relative to American culture. And that's something interesting that we find in in Mark's account. Now, in Mark chapter 1 and verse 1, we have Mark's genealogy. And if we've read Matthew's genealogy in Matthew chapter 1 or Luke's genealogy in Luke chapter 3, we will find Mark's genealogy strikingly different. We don't see all these names of men like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, or David, or any of these kinds of individuals. Mark's genealogy is very simple, very straightforward, and very quick. It's one sentence. In Mark 1 verse 1, it says, "The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." Now, how straight to the point is that? How powerful is that? Here's the genealogy of Jesus Christ. He is the Son of God. Now, what makes this even more interesting is understanding the Romans in the times of the first century A.D. For example, in those days, the common and official title of Augustus Caesar was Emperor Caesar Augustus, Son of God. Now, there's certainly a lot of similarities there between what Mark says of Jesus and what the Romans used to call Augustus Caesar. Also, in 38 BC, on the Roman denarius, we have an image of Julius and Octavian and an inscription saying, "Divine Julius and Divine Son." Also, in 31 BC, on the Roman denarius, we have a depiction of Octavian. The inscription is this: "Caesar, Son of God." So the Romans were very used to this idea of calling their emperors the Son of God, or specifically Augustus, the Son of God. But Mark tells them something differently. He tells them this is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And from here on out, he is going to lay down the foundation, the foundational proof that Jesus truly is the Son of God and not the Roman emperor whom the Romans were worshiping. Another example is in 14 AD where the Roman denarius depicts Tiberius. The inscription is this: "Tiberius Caesar, God's son of Augustus." And so certainly the Romans were used to these ideas. It was on their money. It was on their tongues. It was all over the place. You know, the idea of the emperor being the Son of God. Well, Mark's about to change their minds, and that's the purpose of the Gospel of Mark, to write specifically to that Roman audience and give them the proof that they need for them to understand that the emperors that they worship and serve are not the Son of God, but it is rather Jesus Christ who is truly the Son of God.